One of Drake's loudest supporters just torched the whole victory lap, live on camera, in front of everybody. Not a hater, not a Kendrick stan, one of his own. And the second he said it, the entire house of cards that Drake's camp spent months stacking started trembling. Because when your own guy can't hide the disappointment, that's not a narrative problem. That's a reality problem. And the clown trying to spin Kendrick as the envious one? Bro just handed the internet the funniest cell phone of the year. What did Ray Daniels actually say, and why is it more damaging than anything Kendrick ever put on wax? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe. Let's get into it. Ray Daniels, record exec turned podcaster, one of Drake's most visible public defenders, went on record stating he was heavily disappointed that Iceman didn't move at least 1 million units in its debut week, and doubled down by comparing Drake's cultural ceiling to SGA against Michael Jordan. This dropped during a podcast discussion in June 2025, following the release of Drake's Iceman Rollout across streaming platforms. Meanwhile, a separate clip of Summer pushing the take that Kendrick Lamar was envious of Drake's position started circulating the same week, and the internet ate her alive for it. Drake's most loyal mouthpiece just publicly called his numbers a disappointment. So, what does that tell you about what's really going on behind the curtain? Alright, let's lay this out on the table. In the podcast discussion, Ray Daniels said point-blank that comparing Drake's success to Michael Jackson's is like comparing SGA to Michael Jordan. His words, not ours. And when I heard that, I had to stop, because this is the same man who's been in Drake's corner riding harder than most. This isn't some op coming from the other side. This is a guy who wanted Drake to win, publicly admitting the ceiling isn't where they said it was. He went further. He said Iceman moved 463,000 units first week, with only 13,000 in pure sales.
Yo.
13,000 in pure sales. When I saw that number, I genuinely had to sit back. Because Kendrick's GNX moved 319,000 units, but 32,000 in pure sales, more than double Drake's buying audience on fewer total units. That's not a spin. That's math. Ray's exact framing? He said he thought Drake should have done 1.1 or 1.2 million. That the numbers were, and I quote, kind of disappointing. And this is while acknowledging that Spotify literally iced out their logo for the rollout. The biggest music streaming platform on earth branded themselves in Drake's campaign, and the needle still didn't move the way they expected. Bro said all this and still tried to frame it diplomatically. But you can't put lipstick on that data. Now the Summer clip, the narrative she tried to push was that Kendrick Lamar wanted to swap places with Drake. That Kendrick was envious of Drake's commercial position. That this whole situation was driven by jealousy. And the second she said it, the internet didn't just push back. They obliterated it with receipts, tour numbers, Pulitzer acknowledgments, and Super Bowl headlines. She really picked that hill. After that clip dropped, the comment sections weren't even arguing, they were just laughing. Now that we've seen the receipts, let me show you what nobody connected yet. Here's what y'all need to understand about the timing of all of this. The Iceman rollout didn't drop in a vacuum. It came out after Billboard changed their streaming-to-sales conversion rate from 1,500 streams equaling one album unit down to 1,000. That's a 33% easier bar. And they still didn't hit 1 million. Do the math on what those numbers look like under the old system. Ray Daniels did it on the podcast and admitted it lands around 500,000. 500,000. Under the old counting rules. With Spotify's logo literally iced out on his behalf. Y'all didn't catch that part of the conversation. This album also dropped while the whole cultural conversation was still about the battle with Kendrick, meaning the traffic it generated wasn't organic love for the music. It was curiosity traffic. People tuned in to see if he was addressing Kendrick. And the pure sales data exposes exactly that. 3% of units were pure purchases. J. Cole's project, which had zero major cultural event around it, sat near 10%. That gap tells you who was actually connecting with music versus who was just streaming to see if the diss track was in there. And then there's the context around Iceman being 3 projects bundled in the rollout. 3. And Ray Daniels points out the obvious. You can't push it all through the funnel at once. The numbers got split. Competing with yourself. while Kendrick drops one tight project, moves clean numbers, and his buying audience is more than twice as engaged. We all watched this rollout happen in real time. But nobody was talking about the architecture of why the numbers looked the way they did. Until now. Some smart strategist put a Spotify collab together and probably said, "We're getting 1 million." And somebody in that room should have done this math first. But here's where it gets even more interesting, because when you zoom in close, let's get into the forensics. Because there are layers here that nobody is pulling back. Ray Daniels didn't just casually reach for SGA. Think about what that specific analogy actually communicates beneath the surface. SGA is excellent. SGA is a recent MVP. SGA is the best player on a great team. But your mother doesn't know his name. That's the framing Ray used, and it's devastating. Because the whole Drake mythology has been built around mainstream crossover. White moms in middle America. Soccer moms. The idea that Drake transcends hip-hop demographics. And his own defender just said, on record, that at the MJ level, we're talking about someone Ray's mother knows. And Drake doesn't clear that bar. That's not a hater's take. That's a supporter's honest assessment of cultural magnitude. The fans claiming Drake is LeBron while Ray is quietly conceding he might just be SGA. That's a canyon between the Stan narrative and the informed insider read. 13,000 pure sales isn't just a number. It's a behavioral fingerprint. When you buy an album physically or digitally, you're making a declaration. You're saying, I value this enough to spend money on it. 13,000 people in Drake's entire audience made that declaration opening week. Kendrick's GNX had 32,000 on a project that had less total unit movement. What that says about audience composition is something labels don't want to discuss out loud. Drake's lane is casual listeners. High stream volume, low purchase intent. And Ray Daniels said it plainly. That's not a buying audience. Now here's the forensic punchline. If your audience isn't buying, what exactly are you selling a label for $5 billion? The streams? The streams that exist because the algorithm feeds it to people who didn't choose it? That crack in the argument is now a canyon. Notice what's happening in the comment sections around Iceman. Ray Daniels pointed it out, and it's surgical. The conversation isn't "this song goes crazy." It's "Kendrick is finished." The music itself isn't driving engagement. The beef narrative is. Which means Iceman's cultural moment is rented. It's borrowed energy from Kendrick's relevance. And Drake himself confirmed this by centering Kendrick in the rollout. He's using his opponent's heat to warm his own project. If that's not the most ironic response to the Kendrick is using Drake narrative, I don't know what is. And if you think Drake's camp missed that irony, they didn't. They just hoped you would. Now, let's see how the media played this, because the spin is wild. Now here's where the narrative machine really shows its hand. The mainstream coverage of the Iceman rollout leaned heavily into the raw unit total, 463,000 units. First week, 3 projects, still charting. The framing from outlets covering the numbers angle presented it as a commercial continuation of relevance. The angle was essentially, Drake is still moving numbers, the culture is watching, he's still in the conversation. Then, you had a second lane of coverage that leaned into the Spotify partnership as a cultural stamp of approval. The Spotify logo redesign got treated as evidence of institutional backing and mainstream legitimacy. And then there was a third camp, certain commentators and Stan-adjacent spaces, pushing the Kendrick wanted to be Drake narrative that Summer tried to amplify. Their angle was that Kendrick's entire motivation was envy of Drake's commercial reach, and that the sales data vindicated Drake's position in the industry. Here's where all three fall apart when you stack them against what we already broke down. The raw unit framing ignores the pure sales split. Remember, under 3% buying audience versus Cole's near 10%. Total units don't tell you who's connected. They tell you who got served by the algorithm. The Spotify partnership framing actually backfires. Ray Daniels said it himself. When he saw the Spotify logo iced out, he expected 1 million. The institutional support was unprecedented. And the numbers still landed where they landed. That doesn't prove Drake is winning. That proves the machine was working overtime, and the ceiling was still lower than expected. And the summer narrative? That's been demolished by the timeline alone. Remember the pure sales data. Remember the tour records. Remember the Super Bowl. Kendrick Lamar wanting to swap positions with someone whose buying audience is smaller and whose cultural footprint requires a 3-project rollout and a Spotify rebrand to move 687,000 combined? Some people are doing Olympic-level reaching right now. Drake's defenders are trying to reframe a scoreboard they already lost. The receipts don't spin. But here's the part that nobody, and I mean nobody, is talking about. The mainstream narrative is, Drake is still commercially dominant. The numbers prove relevance, and his supporters are just keeping it honest about expectations. Here's what they won't tell you. Ray Daniels isn't just commentating. He's sounding an alarm, and the industry is listening. Asterisk, asterisk. Here's the real story. What happened with this rollout is not a sales story. It's an inflection point story. And the people who've been inside the music industry, like Ray Daniels, who came out and said out loud that he's a little nervous, understand exactly what the data is revealing beneath the headline numbers. Drake's audience has been casualized. That's the industry term for what happens when an artist's fanbase transitions from invested buyers to passive streamers. It happened to pop acts before him. It happens in cycles. And the data signature is exactly what we saw: massive stream volume, almost no purchase conversion, engagement driven by external narrative rather than musical connection. The $5 billion contract conversation, the one that Mal and others were floating publicly, was never grounded in current market data. It was grounded in Drake's legacy numbers, his catalog, his peak era metrics. But here's the problem nobody's saying out loud. You don't get paid for who you were. You get paid for who you are and where the trajectory is pointing. And right now, the trajectory that the pure sales number reveals is a fan base that streams but doesn't invest. A casual audience, not a committed one. And the labels know this. Remember, Ray Daniels said it plainly. The industry would rather Drake be winning than Kendrick. They prefer Drake commercially, which means if Universal and Spotify and the machine went all in on this rollout, and we saw that they did, and the numbers still landed where they landed, that's not Drake underperforming expectations. That's the market telling the industry that the floor has been found. Drake reached his zenith. Ray Daniels said it. Not a Kendrick stan. Not a hater.
His guy.
Meanwhile, the Kendrick comparison is even more brutal when you sit with it. Kendrick dropped one album. No iced-out Spotify logo. No 3-project rollout. No 2-year cultural runway of beef narrative. And his pure sales doubled Drake's. That's not a lucky number. That's an audience that buys because they believe. That's the difference between a fanbase and a following. And the summer take about Kendrick being jealous? That's not just wrong. It's a tell. When your side starts arguing that the guy breaking touring records, winning Pulitzers, and headlining Super Bowls is secretly envious of your position, that's not confidence. That's a coping mechanism wearing a press release. Drake is SGA. Excellent.
Decorated.
Best player on a great team. But your mother doesn't know his name. And in the conversation about true cultural immortality, the kind that makes a child born 8 years after your death cry because they'll never get to see you perform, there is no comparison to be made. And that is the truth they won't put on the news. So, where does this go from here? Let me tell you exactly what's coming. Mark my words. Here's exactly what's coming. Drake's next project drops within 12 to 18 months with significantly less cultural infrastructure around it. No active beef to drive curiosity traffic. No 3-album bundle strategy. Just music. And when those first-week numbers come in, without the Kendrick fuel, without the Spotify cosign at that scale, without the is he responding, energy pulling casual listeners in, the conversation about his commercial ceiling shifts permanently. The $5 billion contract narrative quietly disappears from respectable industry conversations. Ray Daniels' nervousness turns out to have been well-founded. And the people who were setting billion-dollar expectations are going to be very quiet. Meanwhile, Kendrick is going to keep building. He's going to drop another project at some point, and his buying audience, the people who go to the store, who purchase, who invest, is going to show up again. The gap between pure sales percentages isn't going to close. It's going to widen. Because one of these artists has a fan base and the other has an algorithm. Drake pivots hard. Drops something sonically unexpected, smaller, more personal, no rollout machine around it. Something that requires his actual fans to re-engage with the music, not the narrative. And if that project connects, it's going to do smaller first-week numbers, but higher pure sales percentage. That's actually a healthier trajectory. But here's the twist. Even in that scenario, Kendrick's position doesn't change. Kendrick doesn't need Drake to stumble to hold his place. He already occupies a different zip code in this conversation. The casualization of Drake's audience continues. The contract negotiations get complicated by the data, and we enter a period where the industry starts quietly repositioning its investment. Not publicly, not loudly, but the receipts will show up in where the promo dollars go, where the playlist placements land, and whose rollout gets the Spotify logo treatment next time. Watch the institutional signals, not the press releases. Wait till the next first-week number drops without a cultural event wrapped around it. That number is the real verdict. Everything up to now has been noise. That number will be the signal. And that's going to do it for today. But before you go, I need to know where you stand. Do you think Drake's numbers prove he's still elite, or do the pure sales tell the real story? And who do you think is actually LeBron in this situation, if it's not Drake?
Drop it in the comments right now.
If you're new here, subscribe because when the next numbers drop, we're going to be the ones who called it first.
Peace.